Good afternoon to you. It's a subject that we touched on very briefly with Gina Davison, LBC's Scotland editor, a week or so ago, when plans to hold trials for serious sexual offences without a jury were given the green light in the Scottish Parliament. But they're facing something of a backlash, a growing backlash from lawyers. The Scottish Government wants a single judge to decide whether people are guilty of rape and attempted rape in a pilot scheme only at this stage, aimed at increasing conviction rates. Defence lawyers are concerned that the move threatens the right to a fair trial. I mean, it is the first question that should come to any of our minds if a jury is removed from a trial process as to what the reasons for that are, and are they justifiable reasons. They've said, these lawyers who are very uncomfortable about it, have said they will boycott the scheme. One former judge has described the proposal as repugnant and warned that it could breach human rights law because it's so fundamental, isn't it? Barring exceptions, it's so very few exceptions, it's so fundamental to our idea of justice that we are tried before a group of our peers. Obviously with the judicial system around all of that, but that it is our peers who say whether we are guilty or not under the guidance of and within that structure of the criminal justice system. I was listening to the Scottish Justice Minister this morning, who said, I haven't seen this evidence, but she said that there is strong research evidence to suggest that in rape and sexual assault cases, the jury bias about that issue, about those issues, plays a part in causing a failure to deliver justice. Again, I can't say whether that's the case or not, but we're probably all familiar, and it comes through sometimes on phone calls when we talk about violence against women. There are some old prevailing attitudes, aren't there, about what a woman was wearing or how much she drank, or did she have a pre-existing sexual relationship with the person, and therefore where did the confusion lie, and all of those things. So on at least one level, that was the Scottish Justice Minister's argument really for trying jury-free trials in Scottish courts in the case of rape and sexual assault cases. What are your thoughts on it? Do you think it gets in the way of justice or makes justice in rape cases more likely? 0345 6060 973, the number to call. You can text 84850 or tweet at LBC. If you've been through the Scottish courts for such a case and you wish to talk about it, do give us a call, and you don't need to leave your real name if you don't wish to. Thomas Ross KC joins me, a barrister and former president of the Scottish Bar Association. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
Are you comfortable or not with this plan?
I'm extremely uncomfortable with it. I mean, it's based on some research which doesn't actually prove the claim which is made by the Justice Minister. And obviously, the Justice Minister herself has declared that the purpose of the pilot project essentially is to increase conviction rates. Now, imagine for a second the pressure that puts upon a judge who is allocated a case where the accused is maintaining his innocence, but the judge knows that the purpose of the pilot project is to get a conviction.
And is a judge not above that fray? You think not?
Well, in terms of the judicial oath, he or she should be above it, but we've seen some very recent examples where individual judges have come under attack, principally on social media in relation to sentencing decisions and that kind of thing. And it's easy to imagine that if any judge acquitted any person of rape, then that judge is likely to come under criticism, which puts a great deal of pressure, especially if it's a finely judged case. There's clearly great pressure being brought upon the judges to deliver convictions. And you know, the purpose of any arbitrator is to listen to both sides of the story and to give justice to both parties. The purpose is not for the judge to go into the process essentially being directed by the government to convict.
Why does it amount to him or her being directed by the government to convict? Because the barristers in the case would be able to make arguments for both parties, wouldn't they? The alleged victim and the alleged perpetrator.
Yeah, well, that's what we do at the moment. I mean, there's absolutely...
Well, that would still happen, wouldn't it? It just wouldn't happen in front of a jury.
It would. That's everything that happens at the moment would still happen, but instead of having 15 strangers who are able to bring their own individual life experience from different sects and genders and religions and races, you would be trusting it all to one particular individual who tend to come from a fairly narrow socio-economic group. So instead of the wonderful resource that we have in Scotland at the moment, where you can land here as an asylum seeker today and serve as a juror in 5 years in a murder trial, what we're doing is we're taking the decision-making away from the juries who do a great job every day in our courts and giving it to a judge who has the knowledge that at the end of the pilot project there's to be a report being submitted to Parliament, basically to judge how it's gone. And, you know, from the public statements which the Minister has made, the test is how many convictions did we get?
Well, that may be the Minister's test, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's the judge's test. I guess the judge ideally uses the law, but, you know, I mean, I hear what you're afraid of, but it's not an automatic thing, is it, for a judge to experience that there, I suppose. You said that juries do a good job every day, and I'm sure the majority do, but only half of rape trials result in a conviction compared to about 90% for all crimes. Is that because rape and sexual assault is tougher to convict, and if so, why is it?
Well, it's not that difficult to understand it. You know, in a murder case, there might be 20 individual sources of evidence, eyewitnesses, confessions, fingerprints, DNA evidence, all of that. In a rape case, usually, it's one person's word against another person's word. So it would be a surprise if in cases where there was such little evidence in the standard case, it would be a surprise if it had the same conviction rate as cases where there might be 20 sources of evidence. I mean, it's obvious to everybody that must be the case. And actually, when there was a campaign by the SNP to abolish the rule of corroboration, which requires 2 sources of evidence in Scotland, the very people who were campaigning to get rid of juries were telling everybody that they had to change the law of evidence because it was so difficult to obtain convictions in rape cases because they tended to happen in private when there weren't many other people available to give evidence. Now, if that's the position in which they accept that rape cases are brought, it shouldn't really be a surprise to them that there's a lower conviction rate for rape than there is for cases where there's 20 sources of evidence.
Do you have any concerns about what are called rape myths by the Scottish Government, that in any jury, as you said yourself, they come from all backgrounds, all shapes, sizes, religions, you name it, but also they'll come with their own attitudes to what a woman should behave like, won't they?
Well, that's why we've got 15 of them, you know. So if we have 15 and one person is saying, well, I think, and they then go on to narrate something which is clearly irrelevant, there'll be 14 other people to say, well, look, that's got nothing to do with this case. The issues in this case have been set out by the lawyers, and this is what we need to decide. I don't doubt that, you know, I'm not saying every single juror is perfect. That's why we've got 15 of them in Scotland and you've got 12 of them in England. So that the ones who do the job properly balance out the one who doesn't do the job properly. I mean, and what they're talking about is reducing it to a jury of one, and a person who essentially has been told before the project begins that what we want is more convictions. I
mean, I'm not clear which way, this will go if the pilot happens. But isn't the reality, I mean, I don't know whether this has been your experience, but when I talk, and I have spoken on air a lot with people, listened to a lot of people, both victims of sexual assault and people commenting on the degree to which they believe the scale of sexual assault in this country. And there are so many odd attitudes to what a woman should tolerate in this world. You know, we've still got a lot to learn about it, haven't we? All of us, including maybe even an entire jury of 15 people.
Undoubtedly, and if there is any evidence, which I say doesn't exist at the moment, but if there is any evidence that juries are influenced by rape myths, the judge can give the jury directions.
But how would you know? How would you know they were?
Already in Scotland, the jury is given a direction that there might be many reasons why somebody would take a time before reporting an allegation of a sexual offence. It used to be that no information was given about that. The Crown sometimes would bring psychologists, and then we all adopted the perfectly sensible approach, which was to say, well, it is a factor you can consider, but it doesn't mean that there wasn't an offence committed because somebody took a week to report it. The jury are told that. So we've got the capacity. If anybody can prove that any of these so-called myths are influencing real juries' directions, then I'm all for it.
But is anyone measuring it? It would be my question, because a judge could say till they're blue in the face, this shouldn't be taken into account, that shouldn't be taken into account, the level of inebriation shouldn't be taken into account, whatever. They could say, juries can ignore it, can't they?
Well, they can ignore it. Obviously, they can ignore it. But the whole system, I mean, quite often accused people will bring appeals on the basis that they say, well, look, my lord received a letter saying that juror X said something which was inappropriate and I didn't get a fair trial because of that. And every single one of those appeals is refused by our system on the basis we have to presume that the juries do the job in accordance with the rules. Now, in Scotland, in 48% of rape trials, they convict. So they listen. And, you know, if these myths were as prevalent as people say they are, then how do they manage to get 48% of cases ending in a conviction?
Okay, good question. Let's see what people think. Thomas Ross, KC, thank you, barrister and former president of the Scottish Bar Association. And with everything that Thomas Ross has just said, I'm thinking, bearing in mind as well what the Scottish Government's position is on this and what the Scottish Justice Minister said about the rape myth that she believes and the government clearly believes is keeping that conviction rate significantly lower than generalised crime. On the balance of both of those sets of views, what Thomas Ross has just told us and what the government has said, is this trial of this pilot, I should say, of jury-free rape and sexual assault trials in Scotland, is it worth a go? Is it worth a try? Or is it anti-justice, particularly the kind of justice that we are used to in this country where a jury of your peers says whether you're guilty or not? 0345 606 0973. If you've got direct experience of this in any capacity, it'd be great to talk to you. 84850, the number to text, and you can tweet at LBC. It's 3:15.
This is